I love all of you. And when Bill and Bob last year talked for just a nanosecond about the women in our database and how they were outperforming men, I got really curious about what is underneath that nanosecond. What is our data really saying about women? And what can we learn from what it's saying more deeply than Bob and Bill described? So I went to work. In fact, I had a skunk work operation. I got with our researcher, and we started to work together. And it wasn't until just recently when it all came together. And Lonnie, who I love and respect and never overblows anything. If you know Lonnie, she is so measured. And last week when we were talking together, she said, "Cindy, this is huge." I went, "Yeah, this is huge. We have some big findings here." So let me just talk for a minute about platforms. As soon as some of you found out that I was speaking on women in leadership, a lot of passion arises for topics that I might be talking about from some of you that have been interested in the same kinds of subjects. And I had people reach out in LinkedIn, on email, by phone, and I was so overcome by the generosity of spirit that occurred in those moments. Women just sent me studies. I mean, just study after study. And then I thought, oh boy, I am in a hot mess. Because there's a lot of topics you can talk about when it comes to women. And people feel pretty strongly about some of those issues. And so I had to kind of anchor in and decide what platform I was going to take at this moment in time when you are all here, the people I love. And this goes beyond this group. And it came back to the initial curiosity. What are women doing developmentally in our database? And as I've learned that and as I've dug into that, I think that there might be some overarching ways that then we can talk about some of those other issues. And I hope that you find that, and we'll get back to that at the end of this talk when we talk about implications. The other thing that I want to talk about, and Betsy touched on this a little bit, boy, women have the same path as men in so many ways, and we have a different path in so many ways. The one that Betsy alluded to is the need for more flexibility in our life if we are going to take on family and other things that mean as much to us as the work might mean to us. And women, because we don't compartmentalize as well as men, in fact, that's scientifically proven, have a difficult time navigating that territory. So I want to speak to that territory as we move along too. Because the workplace right now doesn't necessarily allow for some of that accommodation, but when it does, we find that businesses really gain a lot in revenue and in leadership. So that started to work for me in terms of platform. I thought, okay, I've never wanted to speak for women. I never really thought that was my place. It was never my thing. My passion has always been about helping a world of work where people thrive, and leadership has always been a core passion of mine. As I dug into the data and as I thought about what I've had to do in my own life, so let me as a woman speak for me, what I've had to do in my own life to make this work has been a unique path, and that's worth sharing. Now, Betsy also said this year I came inside after working on the outside as a practitioner for many years and allowing for some flexibility in my life, because as a practitioner sometimes you can take on really big projects and then you can cool your jets for a little bit. That's great for a lot of us. So I decided to come inside knowing that the cool my jets part probably wasn't going to be happening for a while. That's okay. I came inside as senior vice president, is what we called it, of organizational development and people. And it was my dream job. Love this job. It's the first time in our company's history, you know, you're manifesting it, that we're big enough to want to develop leaders in our company in the way that we develop leaders outside of our company. That was huge. And I've got a ton of experience of that. This is great. And then I got inside and an opportunity or a need developed because a person left. And we had a need region by region versus global for really in time, on the ground leadership and operations. So for those of you that have been experiencing problems in operations, give me your tomatoes now. I'm your person. I hope as you have experienced the last few months that things have gotten better. And what I'm going to tell you is that in 2019, we are even going to get better. And I am so excited about that. So I speak not only as a woman and as a mother and as a practitioner, but right now, this platform for me is speaking as a woman on the line in a very reactive kind of space. And it's been fascinating for me to know, wonder how I'm going to do in the reactive space and operations. In fact, Bob, when we were talking a little bit about it, said, oh, Cindy, that's a soul-sucking job. Don't do the operations job. And I did it anyway. I know. And you know what? I love it. I really love it. And you know why I love it? Because I am so committed to the people I work with day in and day out and the problems that they face. And I know that I can make a difference. So that's the platform. Now, what I want to talk about today, just crisply and specifically, is what the women in our database are showing us about leadership and what that means, and then try to bring some life to it through personal experience and organizational experience that can help it live for you. So the first thing I want to hit is just a reminder of the demographics. So you remember that Bob and Bill talked about the demographics, underrepresented by women, and yet women are overperforming. So 34% are women. Now here's another thing. Age group, no difference. What you see is that you have men that are in higher areas in 36 or 45 or 50, but not much, not significantly. Here's where our database causes us trouble, guys. And if we could get more precise with this, if we could get better at this, we would have better data. Look at that unknown. So one of the things that people did when they reached out to me was they said, can you tell me more about how the Asian women are doing against other women? Because the statistics show, or the research shows, that they are even more discriminated against. I would love to be able to show that data, but look at our database. I have nothing to work with on that. So one of the things that we need to do on our database is to help us get more specific on some of that stuff, and then knowing that there's other things where unknown is just, if people are going to mark unknown, then they need to have the ability and the opportunity to do that. But I wanted to point that out. The other thing that I wanted to hit real quickly here is that you'll see in the C-suite, very few women are marking themselves in the C-suite, 5%, but not many more men are either. Officer, president, about 12, 13%. You get director, higher than that, and a lot of managers. Here's something interesting. You still have a huge unknown. What I know about what the literature says is that women tend to rank themselves lower than men when it comes to rank. I don't know why that's so, but they do. I also know that women tend to rate themselves as less effective when it comes to leadership effectiveness than men do. Men will rate themselves, say, average 67%, I'm way effective. Women will rate themselves around 49, I'm average. That's fascinating. So women tend to downplay their rank and their effectiveness. That shows up throughout. I think that's fascinating. Here's what we know. Organizations with a greater percentage of women in leadership roles perform better financially. That's the bottom line. That's what all the research says when we do the LIT reviews. Organizations in the top 20% of financial performers have 30% of their leaders as women. So Bill, our CEO, made a huge declaration around this year. And we can say that, and I'm going to point to him for a second and make sure I'm right. We've got him as CEO in terms of who's running our company. We've got 3 men, Carl, John, and Nate, and we have 3 women, me, Betsy, and Amy. We are at 50% if we don't include Bill, and a 60-40 split for our senior leader team inside of TLC Full Circle Group for the first time. And we're really excited about that. Okay, this last one, highest education. You'll notice that women are more highly educated than men, not excessively so, not necessarily statistically so. I would say that's because women have always felt like they needed to be better prepared and that they needed to have their toolkit full as possible when it comes to competing in the world called work. That comes from an old frame because you see, when I went to work, it was in the 80s. How many of you were there? See, look at that, look around you. Oh my gosh, I actually loved all those outfits. I had a really good closet full of them. Here's what was really hard about going to work and starting your career in the 80s. There was a need to make sure that you dressed enough like a man that you were appropriate. Thus the ties and the bow tie, and I had my ties and my bow tie, and I see heads shaking. That was really an important thing. Here's the underlying message of that. Dress like a man, act kind of like a man, put that masculinity on, but you will never be a man. I'm a product of that, and that's a tough environment to be in. It's also a really exciting environment to be in because I didn't see it really clearly when I was in it. I was just doing what we do, which is go to work and see if I can make something of myself. But you will bump up against that over and over and over again. This is the era of I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in the pan, and never, ever let you forget you're a man. Right? That's the rap. So we not only got to be like a man, but you'll never be a man, but boy, don't let your man forget he's a man. That's a tough dance. So it got me thinking, in a world of work where people thrive, it got me thinking about what it means to be a woman now and how far we've come and yet how far we have to go. And I do that when I look at my grandchildren in particular, not even so much my children anymore, but my grandchildren. And I look at the world that we're creating for them and that I hope that we create for them. One thing about a woman I know for sure, and I said this just a moment ago, is we do not compartmentalize. I loved how Betsy brought in not only my children, but her children, because that's what women who have children do. I know not all women have children. They bring in their ailing parents. They bring in other people that they're living with or caring for. We don't compartmentalize it. So as a way to illustrate that, I'd like to bring in my grandchildren for just a moment to pause in this action, and I would like you to think about the children in your life, the children you hope to make a difference for, the children that aren't here yet, and the child within. There we go. Thanks, Ty. There's Avery. There's Peyton. There's Liv. And Ava. Bentley. Blakely. Whitney. My one grandson, Gavin. My oldest, Haley. But trailing clouds of glory do we come. I love that poem. Carl Sagan says we are all made of star stuff, the stuff that lights up the universe. Most certainly, we know that through children. Most certainly, we see the divinity in them, which helps us to see it in us. And I have to bring children into this conversation about women because it's integral to the conversation of women and family. And I have Bentley here, and you'll see just a couple of them throughout our conversation today to remind me what I'm here for and what I'm doing this for. And it's really for the next generation and for the generation that is working now to create a better world, to create a world where we steward more diligently our planet and awaken us to our inherent unit. You see that there is the second law of the universe, which is survival. But the first law has always been that we are one. So when we peek into it and peek into this data, what I see is I see Bentley, and I look at her and I think, what will she be peeking into when she's at work? Here's a woman doing what we do. And we'll look at the overall results and then the trajectory and then the most effective women. So we're going to look at the overall database a little more deeply than Bob and Bill did. We'll look at the 1%, the 50%, and a 67%, and the 99%. And it's a fascinating ride. So you remember this. This is the average woman profile. Look at it. Look at it. See what happens? Okay. So already we know in the overall database that women are outperforming men just from that one graphic. Whoop. Women, men. And then Bob and Bill showed you this, and you go, okay, there's some differences in relating. There's some differences in fact, all categories. What does that mean? So I decided to break it down for us today in a way that we could digest it more saliently and even maybe more deeply. And that's bar by bar. Now, when you look at caring connection, for instance, holy crap, ladies. Mentoring and developing, interpersonal intelligence, fostering team play. Here's where we're the same as men. Balance and composure, no difference in scores. But selfless leader, personal learner, outscoring men. Integrity, courageous authenticity, performing men. Community concern, a big gap. Sustainable productivity, systems thinker, more close. Strategic focus, you can see that's pretty darn close. It could even be even. Purposeful and visionary, achieves results, decisiveness. Here's the kicker. Only 3 dimensions did not reveal statistically significant gender differences: composure, balance, and pleasing. And you saw the stars for composure and balance. They were the same. Let's take a look at reactive. Women are, overall in our database, less reactive than men. Wow. However, ladies, we do tend to have a little perfectionism edge and even a driven edge. That probably isn't surprising to women because we've known we're pretty darn driven, hard charging, but it does fly in the face of a lot of the data out there. That conversation about women says they're too passive. Some are, but mostly we're pretty driven. Less arrogant, less critical, less distant. And check that out. And then the pleasing, of course, is the same as men. So isn't it interesting that women will get the rap for being pleasing and we score the same as men? Fascinating. Now, I want to blow your minds here for a minute because this is where Lonnie and I started to get our minds blown, and there's a couple areas where it really hits. One of them is in effect size. So effect size is the mean difference calculated by another thing that I can't remember. Therefore, when I know I'm going to forget something, I have notes. This actually is a big deal. It's the mean difference divided by the average variance within both groups. Why that's relevant is because the effect size shows practical significant difference, meaning it doesn't change by the sample size and it has a practical effect. So when we have the measuring tape up there, one of the ways we show practical effect, how many of you remember the study, I think it was about 18 years ago, when the Japanese were literally kicking our butts in school and with school testing? Any of you remember that? When they were scoring way higher than Americans? And we were really worried about it because we felt like their competitive edge could in fact overtake a lot of what we considered ourselves really good at. That was an effect size of 0.34. Big hoopla, going crazy over it, effect size of 3.4. Here's what Cohen says about effect size. If I go to school for a year in spelling or math or history, I can predict that enough learning has taken place over the year that I'll get an effect size between 0.20 and 0.30. That's barely significant at 0.20 to quite significant at 0.30. Schools say that if they got a 0.20, that would be substantial. Here's what the studies show. I can reliably count on the fact that if I go to 5th grade and learn well, I'll score somewhere between a 0.20 and a 0.30 difference from the year before. And so learning has taken place, and I can test. I'll test differently at the end of the year than I did the beginning of the year. That's practical significance. Another practical significance is when I compare a 14 and a 15-year-old girl side by side. Can't really tell the difference between those two. They look about the same height, they look about the same maturity. That's a 0.20. I'd have to do some deeper digging to find out the difference. But if it's 13 years old to 18 years old, which is a 0.5, it's visible to the eye, that's moderately significant in a way that almost everybody can see it, and these are different girls in different age groups. If I go to 12 to 18, that's a 0.80, meaning now we have a preteen and almost an adult. That's very, very different, okay? Caring connection, a 0.55 more than men. An effect size of 0.55, meaning that I can tell the difference between that leader and this leader almost automatically. That's a substantial effect size that's over 0.5. It's significant. In fact, Lonnie's word, it's huge. They're doing something very differently than men are doing. Now, here's the really interesting part. Arrogance is a negative 0.47, meaning they have less arrogance than men by 0.47 effect size. That's a very different result. That's a very different leader, and that's just our average database. And then you see all the ones in, you see community concern, which is huge. Women are far more apt with an effect size of 0.43. Very different. You can see those a mile away. And then all the ones in the threes, which are small and significant and showing up differently. Not that they're different than men. They're showing up differently with these advantages. And there's a lot of them. Look at them. Okay. So the tendency would be then to say, okay, so women are better than men. And while we might want to go there, Lonnie reminds me, says, now Cindy, you cannot say that women are better than men. Don't tell her I just did. Because that's not true. What we know about this database is that women who choose leadership and get on this path show up better than men who choose leadership and get on this path. So if I were to go outside and pick Sarah and Joe, thinking that Sarah's just going to be a better leader, but she has no desire to be a leader, and she hasn't put her mind around being a leader, she may or may not be a better leader than Joe. So it's not a women-men thing. It's a women-leader thing and a men-leader thing. That's an important distinction. They also don't show up better in the beginning, not even at all. So this is fascinating for me, and I'm going to be, channel my inner Bob and geek out here for a minute. Because the trajectory, when you look at the 1%, the 50%, and the 99%, is stunning. And here's where it starts to show differences. So the operating system, the inner game, in our instrument is compared against, something that we might see as an outer game, which is leadership effectiveness based on these questions. I just want to know, am I an example of a ideal leader? Well, that's an inner game thing, but the way leaders see that initially is, how do I check that box? Tell me how I can just provide leadership that people want around here. See that as an outside game. So it's juxtaposed against my current job. So we're not talking a pure play of development. We're talking about development against the role that I'm in and the complexity I face within that role. So the kicker is, for some of our leaders, and it is an ass kick, it is hard for them, and it's hard for all of us actually, is when they've been performing pretty well and they get a new role with more complexity and they go right into some of the stuff that they thought they'd overcome in their childhood, some of the stuff they thought they'd overcome in their socialized mind, And it really is hard on us all when we find ourselves, we thought we had included and transcend, and what we find is throughout our life, we include and transcend, and then we revisit it. And there's always more. We include, we transcend, we revisit it. There's always more. And the more we do that, the more we include, the more we transcend. So here's the development, thank you, trajectory across the board for men and women. What we saw in the 1%ers is not going to be a surprise to you. In the qualitative data, they're at 1%, which means that their LE score, that leadership effectiveness, people are rating them as a 1%. So it's a harsh score. For both men and women, ineffectiveness on the qualitative data is disproportionately amplified. Bill and Bob talked about the amplifying effect. It's a pile-on effect. There is hardly anything that their followers, their peers, their boss is happy about in terms of their leadership effectiveness. So comments are rough. But at 50%, you start to see a passion boot up and a people skills boot up that is really fun to look at. And men and women have moved from 10 to 10 reactive to 3 each reactive. In fact, women could even go 2, but we added 3 in at the very last minute, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then at the top, you see disproportionate, extraordinary comments. Disproportionate, extraordinary comments of 10 to 10 creative. There is a complete amplifying effect. And not only that, at that level, women will show far less reactive tendencies, even at the top, than men. So here's what the 1% women leader looks like. You can even see here that men may be even a little less reactive. And here's the challenges that they have to go through, side by side. You'll see that most of them are ineffective communication, ineffective interaction, inflexible. Both have poor relationships. So when we talk about women being better than men at relationships, at this level they are not. Do you see the differences in blue? The thing that on the top 10 challenges for men that gets highlighted is they're operating independently, they're lacking emotional control, and they're aloof. The thing that women get commented on are not enough business background, not trustworthy, and blames others. So for me as a coach, I'm looking at it going, okay, there are some challenges for women that are very different than men. Men kind of that operate independently. I don't need to coordinate with anybody. I don't need to communicate with anybody. Certainly don't want to collaborate with anybody. I just want to get it done. We get that. Women tend to really suffer from not getting on-the-line jobs, not digging in and knowing the business when they're promoted to leadership. Also being ineffective at communications, but they do also have a thing called not trustworthy, interesting, and that they're blaming others. And so that's fascinating. You wonder what that's about. Now I have Liv here, and we call her Braveheart Liv. She marks up herself. I know when Liv marks up herself and she's putting on her armor that she's thinking she's putting on her Rainbow Dash armor, and that's going to bring her magical powers. And she is our tried and true tomboy all the way. Nothing can hurt this girl. She falls, she trips, she bumps on her head, shakes it off, and just keeps going. I bring her to this challenge because I want you to see the little girl inside. The little girl inside that thinks she's armored up, that's put on her magic powers, that's put on her Rainbow Dash. This is going to help her. And yet at the 1% level, what we find, what both men and women find, is that the armor that I have is insufficient for the need. All the stuff that I thought was my superpower is really getting challenged right now. Rumi says it may be better than that. For years, copying others, I tried to know myself. From within, I couldn't decide what to do. This is what leaders are faced with at the 1%. They're trying things. They're copying others. They're looking out there for what other people are doing. And the people that I've coached on the 1% say, well, just tell me what to do. I'm trying everything. I don't understand. I feel so unappreciated. I feel so undervalued. I feel so unseen. I can't understand. I'm trying this, and then I'm trying that. And I'm trying this, and then I'm trying that. And none of it's working. It's a frustrating place at the 1%. It comes from that socialized mind that hasn't yet opened up to a new possibility. For years, copying others, I tried to know myself. Within, I couldn't decide what to do. So the next step is to find that compass. And you'll see here, and I'm not going to go through these, but I want to just pick out a couple. The difference is not very stark between either men or women. Eric is not a good leader. I think he would like to be. So those comments show up. Sharon dictates in her leadership. And she can be abrupt and confrontational with employees who make errors. She tends not to give people the benefit of the doubt before assigning blame. So the big developmental challenge, if we look at it overall for the 1%, is finding our authentic power, which comes through self-authoring. For women, becoming less victims of our circumstances and owning our life in a different way. And for men, making more space in their life for others so that they can be more effective. And you see that in the literature, where men tend to be, in the literature, cited as more competitive. I am a winner, versus women saying, I am collaborative. We win because we're a team. That shows up in the literature. It doesn't show up yet here in the 1%, but it will as we start to progress. So let's look at the 50% for just a quick second. This is fascinating. So you go from the 1% where everything is scrambled in my life and a complete rewrite of my narrative and having to find my inner self and my inner anchor and how I'm going to guide my life, to the 50%, which is a lot like our overall average, where we're now hitting on both sides of the equation, the reactive and the creative, we're right in the middle. We're at 50% leader effectiveness. And that's a pretty great score, by the way. When you hit 50%, you're feeling like you're cooking a bit. You're feeling like you got some things figured out. What I love about what shows up is that passion, which Bob has said forever, is a boot up into creative, shows up for both here in the top 7. So who knew? Bob was right all along. What stands out to you really quickly about the men versus the women on the reactive? What's still being pernicious for men? Yell it out. Yeah, interesting. Ineffective communicator and ineffective interaction, whether it's passive or aggressive. That's a pernicious pattern that is still holding even in the transition now between reactive and creative. It was there in full reactive. It's still in the transition between reactive and creative. Women seem to, for some reason, drop that. Somewhere between 1 and 50%, they have dropped that reactive piece. and they're seen as personable and approachable. And note, they've cleaned up their act on knowledge, excellent knowledge, team builder. And now their two big reactives are micromanaged and overloaded. So here's Blakely. This is a great example for me of in the middle. I'm no longer Liv the Braveheart. I've got on my clothes and my princess outfit and a hat, just in case. So I have more flexibility. I've got a little male, baseball cap and the princess outfit. So I can now, the big polarity on feminine and masculine, I'm working that. I'm working that polarity. And I've got two hands on two steering wheels because one might not be good enough. What we added at the very last moment here was an underlying self-doubt that does become quite pernicious for women, different from men. So the key in the top 7 are micromanaged and overloaded, but an underlying self-doubt starts to show up here and is the work probably for a lot of women, certainly is for me, and periods where that can be crushing and periods where I feel like I've got that under control. This shows up in the data between women and men. You'll see here on the women's side, as driven as she does not succeed at the expense of others. So that driven piece that you saw overall, now getting a little amplifying effect. I'm driven, but it's not at the expense of people, where I was ineffective with people. What she needs to learn is that she has too much on her plate, needs to say this is impossible, and in the blue, needs to stop seeking affirmation in every step of the decision-making process and not second-guess herself so much. That's where the self-doubt piece, Lonnie and I decided, you know what, even though it may not be in that top area, it's said in a bunch of different ways, and we need to incorporate that because that's showing up in a lot of different ways. Now, what I want to get to real quickly here is the 67% on our quantitative data. You'll see here how that is a lot closer together between men and women. These are men that are performing at 67% and women. You'll still note that women are performing at a higher level than men, particularly in a couple areas. What Lonnie says is don't let the line sway you from the fact that there are very big differences in here. Even though they seem small because of the way it's calculated, they're very big differences. And if that's true, then this one's huge. This is at the 67%. Where men are holding on to their reactive tendencies at 45 to just probably barely 32, 33, the top score is in controlling for women overall at 32, and the other two are in their 20s. Virtually not there. Now, I'm not going to go through the bar charts because I don't have the time for that and didn't plan on having the time for that. Only 2 dimensions did not reveal statistically different gender differences. Balance, which was the same, and driven. No statistic difference there. All scores, just like you saw in the overall database, favored women except for composure, balance, and strategic focus. In strategic focus, men did outperform women at the top level by 1.6%, I believe. So 16, 0.16. So a 16 where you saw the 20, that's how that bar would look. So that's significant. Men have a really nice edge there at the 67%. However, women are still seen as strategic thinking. It's strategic focus. I don't have any more to say about that other than that's interesting. Haven't taken the dive in on that. But here's what, again, might blow your mind. When you do effect size, the carrying connection between those that are at 67%, not the 60% and the 50 or the overall or the 1%, but those in the 67 percentile or more, when you look at women against men, women are 0.63 over men in effect size. That's 3 grades if you go to Cohen. 0.20 is substantial for 1 grade. That's 3 grades, or a 13-year-old to an 18-year-old. You can see that a mile away, and that's when Lonnie said this is huge. The other thing that's huge there is that overall for relating, women scored a 0.47 above men. So the whole category, 2 grades above what men are doing, if you just use that analogy, which I know it's only a metaphor. And significantly, arrogance is down by 0.49, ambition is down by 0.50, and community concern is up by 0.40. Whoops, I don't want that. So I want to quickly, before we close, be able to get to the most important piece in here, which is this little bubble. What ends up happening when you use those and then go to the 99%, and we did the analysis on the 99% of leadership effectiveness. So if you scored 99% on leadership effectiveness, what were the comments like? For women, they were people-oriented, 80, which is 160 out of 200 points possible, 80% of the time. It's a huge endorsement. Lead by example is at a 60%. Purposeful and visionary, 64. These are really big superpowers. Jenny is very committed to our values and leads based on those beliefs. She instills a high level of trust, thus has strong relationships throughout the organization, and has built a very supportive, motivated, and focused team. She leads by example, is very dedicated to her role as a leader, and holds herself and her team to high standards of values and accountability. She supports her team by challenging them to learn and take on a different perspective. She allows her leaders to make mistakes and learn from them. Jenny is still not as sure of herself as her talent, results, and impact would imply. And that is why that picture is there for you. So one day my granddaughter is playing with a bunch of toys, and she sees a wreath, a plastic wreath. It's not very beautiful, and decides that it's going to be her crown, and sticks it on her head and turns with those beautiful big eyes. And she is so majestic, and she has no idea what she has just done. That's a woman. Now, can I have 5 minutes? Is that okay? Okay, Michael, thank you. So my thing is showing I'm going to be out of time, and I need 5 minutes, if it's okay. It is. Okay. What's interesting about women compared to men here in the 99%, they're rocking it. These are rock stars. These are people that are scoring 4.88 on leadership effectiveness. There is no man that is slouching at 99%. So don't ever hear that. In fact, one thing I want to hit really hard that I didn't hit before, and this is really important to me. When one group marginalizes another population, it never ends well. It is always a lose-lose. So for my grandson, who happens also to be white because he didn't have a choice in that. He came from 2 white parents. White men are having a tough time right now because of a lot of other stuff going on. And a tendency would be when everyone else rises to marginalize that. Let's not marginalize it. Let's not marginalize anybody. Let's look at where we're great, and let's finally unite against our inherent unity, because that's where the magic is. So when I contrast, I don't want you to hear that I'm marginalizing, because these are great men, and I have had nothing, with the exception of 2 bosses. I am a Me Too girl. With the exception of 2 bosses, I have nothing but men who have supported me, who have loved me, who have mentored me, and who have helped me. And I am a better woman because the men around me than I ever would have been by myself. That has to be said. So when you look at the men bubble, you'll see there's just a lot more reactive. And that's at the 99%. I mean, look at the difference here. I'm going to go back here for a second. There are 5 bubbles there, 1 really big one, and there are 11 bubbles there. Holy crap, at the 99%. Now there's my grandson, and this fits him perfectly already. He's 9. James' greatest attributes as a leader is innate ability to visualize solutions and quickly execute the necessary steps to arrive at that solution. James is not afraid of being wrong. Gavin never thinks he's wrong. And makes bold moves that give this operation a competitive edge. He is approachable and earns the support of his team by winning their trust with honest communication and setting clear expectation. James is not arrogant, but prides himself on being successful, and his competitive nature drives his team to be better than their competition. That's a leader you want to work for. But notice the reactive. James is very ambitious and somewhat aggressive. He needs to continue to remember that his way of operating is not always well received by others. He needs to take a moment to evaluate his delivery. In today's marketplace, patience is something that will only serve him in achieving greater results. And I see my grandson, who is, getting raised through football. Football is brutal. Man, that's an aggressive sport. Just kills us grandmothers and moms. And he loves it so much, and it's shaping him. One of the things I loved on Saturday was when they lost their next to championship game, the coach said, "Who wants that team again? Who wants that team again? Who wants that team again?" And they're all like, "Yeah, we want to get that team again." Versus the woman, my granddaughter, who's in dance and can stick her foot clear up there, and the teacher saying, 1 inch more, 1 inch more, 1 inch more. She's got tears streaming down her face. Is that just not it? It's such a great illustration between how my 2 grandkids, right now, you see nurture nature playing out. So let me just highlight here in a couple closing comments. You can see the gaps. Where men have gaps are really in the ineffective interaction and impulsive, and women at the 99% level, and it started at the 50% level in LE, can't quite get a handle on the overloaded thing. I don't know if we ever will. I just don't know if we ever will. I do know that at 95%, it's a lot less energetic costs than it was down below. There's a lot better perspective on it. Now, here's the choreography that women play. When you take the qualitative and the quantitative, what you see is women doing something extraordinary through relationships. Now you notice they're kicking on all cylinders across all quadrants. But their superpower, where their real differentiator, is in a people orientation that drives deep relationship, that drives caring connection, that builds strong trust and relationship, and it amplifies everything they are and everything they do. And they have a unique one called Lead by Example. Women are 60 to about 30, so twice as much lead by example comments than men were. And this was a special quality where women get in and provide the ladder by which people can go. They're rolling their hands up and their sleeves up in the work. They're providing a path. They're providing servant leadership. The models in our world are those kinds of leaders too. When you look at Martin Luther King, marching with the people, and his wife, who was maybe even more extraordinary and continued that legacy, rolled up their sleeves to get the work done and lead by example. Mahatma Gandhi, lead by example. Nelson Mandela, lead by example. Mother Teresa, lead by example. These are servant hearts. These are the strings that women play, and they play them beautifully when they get into this more integral level. Buddha and Christ both said, if you want to find yourself, you need to lose yourself to find yourself. This is what women do so extraordinarily well. And I think some women do it because they learn early on through childbirth that they are going to have to give up their body, that it will not be their own. They'll have to give up all pride, all arrogance of who they thought they were and what they thought they'd be, because something else is taking over. And they will bear the stretch marks of that for the rest of their life. And when they have the mommy makeover, it's still a reminder that something else extraordinary happened here in this body. And we give ourselves over to those creative processes. We give ourselves over to others in a way that moves me. We give ourselves over to a cause that's higher than we are, and a work that's greater than we are, in a work that we can't do by ourselves. We know we can't do it by ourselves, and we need others. And that's how we embrace it, and that's how women embrace it. And I'm out of time, so I'm going to close. Thank you so much.